Welcome everyone, and thank you very much to the AILA for inviting me down here. Great opportunity to come down, return to Hobart after about 25 years. I think the last time I was down here. Interesting, some of the stuff Andrew was just saying, was talking about very much, it was placemaking, a word we hear a lot about now, but he used some different words which was really nice to hear, and he was talking very much about the sense of place and the topography, the landform, and the amplification of that is some of the things we do. Okay, moving on to this talk, just taking a couple of quotes from the book Building Legible Cities. Legible cities aim to improve people's understanding, experience and enjoyment of the city. Legible cities link users to destinations in a complete movement and information system. And legible cities aim to take your user into account at every step. Wayfinding is part of a legible city, but in those definitions we just heard, those descriptions, it's very important to see that they were talking about two important things. There was the physical side and the cognitive side. There was movement and information. So really, this talk is very much about walking. And the beauty of walking and the walking in cities is you get very close to the city. You understand what's happening in the city. Okay, the outline, just really best wayfinding systems, where are they? Movement, quick discussion about movement and where it's going and how it's changing. The role of the street, if we're talking movement, we have to talk about streets. And then we get to how do we plan the urban infrastructure? How do we plan it so that people can find their way around? What are the paths to that? P2P is some of the work that CLOUSTONs have been doing. It's basically policy to pavement. How do you take the IDs and get something on the ground that works? And then we'll return to wayfinding. Okay, we're the best wayfinding systems. I was thinking about this, and I reckon zoos, botanic gardens, parklands, sports precincts. And why are they the best? I think they're the best because they're already set up for pedestrians. The whole system of those places, they're precincts, they're identifiable areas, and they're set up for pedestrians. Interesting too, they tend to be of a size and a place that spatially we can get our head around and understand relatively easily. So linked to that, there's probably a bit of a warning there. Wayfinding is directed at pedestrians, the movement of pedestrians. If you haven't got a place or a city or a precinct that is well set up for pedestrians, wayfinding is likely to be unsuccessful. And but saying that, some of the best wayfinding that isn't directed at pedestrians is road signage. If you're travelling from Sydney to Melbourne, for instance, you head out of Sydney, Goulburn, Canberra, Melbourne, and you get your time. So you get good wayfinding in a road system. So it does work there. If you've got a good walking environment and one that leads towards good wayfinding, there's two good returns. One is that it's a good walking environment for locals, and wayfinding for visitors is likely to be simple and intuitive. Okay, how's movement changing? I think a lot of things are changing and there's competing forces at play. Most of us know about that shift from private vehicles to walking or cycling, or the other way. There was an interesting one on Great Southern Land on the ABC the other night. I don't know if people watched it was on Transport. And I think across Australia, broad terms, 4 out of 5 trips to work are in a private vehicle. Hobart was mentioned, 9 out of 10 in Hobart, a private vehicle in Hobart. I thought that was interesting. I do know that Darwin has one of the highest cycling uses in Australia, something like 3 times the national average. So, broad figures, but to a large extent, still primarily cars. There are a couple of game changers too that are maybe pushing us in a particular direction as well. Low carbon economy is certainly one of them. And I think one that's going to become much more important too is inactive lifestyles and the associated health issues there. So coming back to the street, what is the role of the street, and if that's where our movement is and where the wayfinding is going to be, we need to understand our streets. So the streets have always been corridors for movement, corridors for commerce, but they are changing in how we use them. There's certainly traditionally been a very community space, but perhaps that's not happening so much anymore. I won't go through that too much, but you know, some of the existing scenarios and challenges that are facing us with traffic congestion and productivity and loss of community and safety and all the rest of it, streets actually can provide some of those solutions. So I won't go into that at all too much. So really, what do we do? How do we go about planning the urban infrastructure that it becomes good for walking and by extension simple for wayfinding? Firstly, you've got to plan for the walking and plan for the cycling. Enhance connectivity, remove the barriers, get the shift right, and of course that all has to happen in quality streets. A couple of these images that you will have seen there, and I'll just go back to the other one as well. This was a project that was undertaken in Britain. The streets left my mind. But you can see there, that's still open to traffic, no curbs. It's a little bit unclear where the parking, cyclists and everything else go. There's seats in amongst parking. Quite an ambitious sort of approach to how the street might work. So really, connectivity, it's really important to understand your city. And there's a lot of work that has to be done up front, and it's not just understanding the city, you have to understand the people as well. This is, most of you will recognise that as the CBD of Sydney. I got one of the people in the Sydney office to just mark on a map the areas of Sydney that they thought they knew well. So those highlighted bits are the bits they understand. The rest of it probably could be a little bit darker than it's shown on the slide. So some areas they know, and they know very well. But in a wayfinding sense, there's little pockets there that are potentially linked. And if you know Sydney at all, some of them have very good visual links. So some of the urban structure, and you've also got the harbour and topography there. Street hierarchy, views, vistas and parklands, they can also be part of that mental map and legibility. And I think Tim's going to pick up on a lot more of that too, about how the urban form and the components of the urban area can assist wayfinding. We're pretty familiar with all the, the connectivity. Yeah, so a lot of the solutions are going to happen in the street of how we deal with connectivity. There's icons to be iconic buildings, and but one of the main things is going to be shifting the right of way from cars to cyclists and pedestrians. What are some of the constraints, barriers? Don't really need to talk much about the barriers there, we're quite familiar with those. There are solutions though. We can remove the cars or at least shift the balance and the priority. Bridges and links, we've seen, certainly Melbourne has some good examples, Brisbane as well, some excellent examples of how bridges can overcome some amazing constraints, physical constraints, and create life and activity in areas where there previously wasn't those links. And it does come down to quality streets and how we value the streets and how we're going to use the streets. I mentioned earlier about the health returns. There's obviously social value and community values in that. There's certainly environmental values. I had an interesting seminar just the other day that I went to on eye trees, and it's been brought out by the Arborist Association of Australia, and it's actually a very effective manner of measuring environmental returns from street trees. So we know they have a value in an amenity sense, but they've also got a measurable value in terms of water interception, and pollution removal and so forth. Quality streets can lead to increased productivity, commercial viability and 24-hour use. Activity and amenity. If we're going to get a walking system and a walking city, you need to link a whole lot of activity nodes. You need facilities that support walking and movement of different forms, rest points, long and short stays, long and short trips, how do you work with those? And touching on some of the things that Andrew mentioned earlier too, interpretation and secret gems. Melbourne, Sydney, Hobart, cities with a long history and stuff, there's a lot of little secret gems there around the city that you only see when you walk. But how do you discover them? Policy to pavement. So the challenge really is about, I believe, is less about what signs and where and what information to provide. Firstly, I think we need to think about the pedestrian infrastructure and where. So you need to go through a process of getting that right. And to a large extent, Hobart, I think, does remind me a little bit of Darwin. Different parts of Australia, we're remote, we're regional. Populations are a little bit more manageable for me than, say, Sydney and Melbourne. Nice wide streets with not so many cars on them, which is also pleasant. And I suspect quite conducive in many ways to walking and cycling as well. But how do you get it happening? So it really is a planning and design approach that does require detailed analysis. You need to look at the barriers and what the solutions are to that. Access for all hotspots. The hotspots comes back to some of that earlier slide of Sydney with the bright points in it. They almost become stepping stones. It's easy to move from one known destination to another one. A very simple guidance between known points. And so into that as well, the idea of precincts may well come into play as well, so that areas become more manageable and understandable in your spatial awareness of a place. In the case of Hobart, it might be certainly the waterfront areas would be an obvious one. I don't know Hobart well enough to think of others. Some of the work that Andrew worked with me in Darwin was looking at a city area. There was the waterfront area, and there was about 5 or 6 precincts within the city area. And I suppose the most important thing with this too, and it happens with wayfinding as well, is that it's incremental steps that finally make the change. It's a bit like planting a tree too. It's only a small thing initially, but over time and as each new tree goes in, great things happen. And I think most of you will be aware of some of the great changes that have happened in Melbourne in terms of walkability, wayfinding, changes that have happened down there. There have been a series of small incremental steps that have happened over 20 years' time to transform the city. And it's now starting to happen in Sydney. There's plenty happening in Sydney in that regards. And that is very much a way to approach it, that they are small steps. And that often reflects realities in terms of budgets and so forth. So can we find our way? And talking wayfinding, I think firstly we need to ensure that we are interested in walking and cycling. There's a whole lot of things that are happening in Hobart and certainly in Darwin now with more residential population happening in the city. I think Andrew was saying that a few years back the residential population in Hobart was very, very low, but that is changing. Certainly in Darwin now we've got an immense population that lives right in the CBD, and that's transformed the place in the way how people value the streets and where the emphasis should be on the streets. As for cars, if we plan and build for pedestrians and cyclists, they will come. And finally, well-planned and targeted signage will give you a legible city. So back to where we started, without walkable streets and environments supported by pedestrians and cyclists, wayfinding signage is largely irrelevant, or could be. The better walkability, the easier for wayfinding. Not every city or town or region or precinct is going to be the perfect walking environment, and wayfinding does play a critical role in filling the gaps and providing that level of information. This one's a little bit of a case study, and I don't know how many of you will be familiar with that Legible London. In some respects, it's probably, in my view, one of the best wayfinding exercises undertaken in recent times. It was based on extensive research. There was a prototype installation. In the trial area, it was only a very small area. They had 48 different bits of information, signage or hardware in this small area. They replaced it with 19 structures, so a nice reduction in clutter. Very importantly, consistent and unified language and style, and a hierarchy of information. And the stepping stones, coming back down to the stepping stones again, and how important it is to recognise human spatial awareness and how we think areas mentally. And they've picked up on that very well. Just a few of the basic design principles. I won't go through all of them. The ones I think are quite relevant in a wayfinding system is to progressive disclosure and don't make me think. The progressive disclosure really deals with the right information at the right time. The next one, don't make me think, is keep it simple as you can make it. The key sign components in the case of the Legible London, right at the top is the beacon. This is, beacon's over 3 metres tall. You can see it, most people would be able to see it and recognise it from 70 metres away, over the top of people's heads. In a busy street, it's still visible. And if you can see that, you know you're in the right direction, or you can get further information. As you get closer and closer, and you'll see that illustrated in an item coming up, you'll see that more information is revealed. So you've got the beacon at the top, locality, quick glance, you know where you are, that's fine. Direction info, okay, I know I'm going to Piccadilly Circus, I'll turn right here. If you want more clearer information, the planner map is dealing with stuff within a 15-minute walking distance, and that's important. They talk about walking distances, so it's not about, walking time, not distances. Most people have difficulty. You speak to one person how far 400 metres is, to the next person it's quite different. People have different perceptions of length or distance, but time, everybody's using the same time. So they talk about time, so what's within 15 minutes. So that's a planning document. I've looked at a map, off I go, 15 minutes later I need some reassurance. I'm unlikely to do that. Now that translates out to about a kilometre. So if you imagine you had a planning map in Hobart CBD, I'm just guessing here, but I would imagine the CBD area might only be 2 kilometres by 2 kilometres, 4 kilometres squared perhaps, if that, might be smaller. So you're not necessarily talking about a lot of these signs, if they're strategically placed. The next level down is a finder map, and we're talking about 5 minutes. From 5 minutes, you can look at the map and say, first right, second left, I'm there, whatever else. There you can start getting down to the detail. And these maps also go to the stage of getting down to a street and addressing things. And the other important thing about how these are designed, they're heads up. So what you see is what you see. So there's no turning maps around and so forth. Pretty simple, pretty logical. This may not apply so much to Hobart, it certainly doesn't to Darwin. Very much integrated with the public transport, the underground. Interesting when they did their research here, and it's very important that you do your research and know where you are and what you're looking at. Most people in London, before this system came in, what was the map most often used by people trying to find their way around London? Anyone has the guess? Underground, exactly, the underground map. Has anyone been to London and used the underground map as a map? I got caught out one time. I was going from A to B, went down to the station. Oh, somebody's thrown themselves on the line. That's okay, I can go there, change there, go there, change there, and I'll be there. Popped up out of the other end of the ground. Mold pops up out of the ground. That would have only been a 5-minute walk. But on the tube map, it was telling me something else. So the map will be part of that. And the buses. Again, maybe public transport in Hobart's not so good. Darwin's pretty similar, but we do have a public transport. And we do also have a city link bus within Darwin, a tourist, they call it the tour tub, which picks up a whole lot of the tourist icons and things. So any wayfinding system that ties into that is going to be the value and the return on the investment is going to be greatly increased. In London, linking the wayfinding to the public transport is essential. This one just gives you a quick illustration of how the different components work, and you can see that the type of information and where you are when you're viewing it is clearly thought through, a nice simple hierarchy of information. So that's really the summary for me, the end of my talk, and I suppose just finishing off with two sort of definitions of wayfinding. The first one is mine, guided movement, helping people find places and know where they are going, so they're confident and they know what they're doing. And the final one from Wayfinding in Legible London, using spatial and environmental cues to move from one place to another, and tools designed to help decision making before and during the journey. Wayfinding is broken into two distinct phases, planning and navigating. And in my view, planning to walk is the important first step. Thank you.